Springsteen. Singer, songwriter, showman. One of the most prominent icons in the history of popular music. By the release of Born in the USA, he had secured a global audience and an enviable critical reputation. Yet his road to the top was a long one. Growing up in New Jersey, Springsteen would come to chronicle his early years, painting a distinctive picture of small-town America, previously unexplored in rock music.
In terms of a credible persona, a persona you could suspend your disbelief over, his New Jersey identification definitely gave him an angle and a leg up.
Consistently staying true to himself, Springsteen fought many battles to ensure that he remained in control of his career and that his music remained authentic and personal.
Springsteen, I really don't believe, plays anything he doesn't believe in. When he's playing his music and he writes that stuff, and this goes way back, he's always been like that. He's serious and he believes in it. Because he wouldn't get up there in front of 10,000 people and do it unless he believed in it.
This is the story of Springsteen's journey from Freehold rocker to a revered and respected superstar. The story of how Bruce Springsteen became the boss. Freehold, a small town in the heart of New Jersey. It was here that the American icon Bruce Springsteen spent his childhood. And it was this town and those surrounding it that he would later immortalize in his lyrics. Now, for many, the state of New Jersey is synonymous with the name Springsteen.
Well, I think a sense of place is important to any artist in one form or another. I think that's certainly true in American popular culture, and I think New Jersey was very, very important to Springsteen. New Jersey, of course, has a reputation, or had a long-standing reputation of being something as a joke. It's sort of between two places. It's not quite New York. It's not quite Philadelphia, and so there was a kind of a chip on its shoulder to some degree, at least in some quarters. And I think that Springsteen was aware of that and to some sense leveraged that. It became part of the mythos of his sort of outsiderdom. And so in that regard, I think it was important.
The Springsteen family lived in the quiet suburbs of this blue-collar town, and Bruce was enrolled in the local Catholic school.
I met Bruce Springsteen first, I think, in 1960. We went to St. Rose of Lima, which was a Catholic school across the field from me. I had seen him coming out of his aunt's house, which was right around the corner from me. And my brother and I were practicing our snowball routines, making ice balls. Ice balls could knock a person out. And since there was nothing else to do, we used to see this kid come out of that house. So it was like, wait till he starts walking. So we'd be behind Cheryl Likes' house, the bushes. He was throwing his snowballs at him. He was ducking so fast. So that kid got skills. He's fast. Don't mess with him. So my brother tried to pick him off a couple of times. I tried to pick him off a couple of times. Nobody could ever hit him. I don't know what it was about him. He knew how to move. Maybe that's why he does his thing today.
After completing his early schooling, Bruce began studying at Freehold Borough High School, where he met fellow student Joseph Balencko.
What Bruce was like, quiet, laid back, not necessarily into the same things that I would think of doing, into music more, even at a young age.
Now a teenager, Springsteen had been heavily into music since childhood.
When I was 9 years old, my mother had on Elvis Presley, so that was the first blast, and it was the kind of thing you'd come down and go to school, and the radio would always be on in the kitchen every morning, wherever the top 40 station was, and so she was always listening to music, and I guess the early rock and roll stations, and because I was only 9, and I remember when I saw Elvis, it affected me enough to go out and get a guitar, you know, and try to play it, which I couldn't do because I wanted to play like it right away. And in those days, you know, like when you went to take lessons, you know, it was like, you know, some crazy song or something. So I gave up till I was 13, and the English thing happened in America, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the Animals, and so, you know, and that was a time when I was, you know, in my teens, you know, like 65, I was 15, you know, 16.
Was not into a whole lot. He stayed with his music, and that's what he did. He wasn't in any kind of fantastic groups doing anything that would go on in town, but he liked what he was doing, and I had to give him that respect for that. You know, everybody's got their own thing when you're growing up, and that's what he stayed with.
Everybody knew Bruce for some reason. Oh yeah, there goes Bruce. You know, he's always had his guitar on his back, and you would see him walking down South Street with that guitar hanging off the back, you know, and we knew that he was going to jam somewhere. You know, so he kind of like set what he was about, you know, as a kid. You know, we knew that he wasn't going to play no baseball. He wasn't going to be no football player. But he was damn sure going to be doing some rock and roll. So, but nobody would have expected that he'd go as far as he did.
In 1965, Springsteen joined the Castiles, a young local band sponsored by music enthusiast Tex Vineyard. He recruited Frank Marziotti, a bass player in his mid-20s, to oversee the group's activities.
You going to mug me? I'm not going to mug you.
Is that gorgeous or what, eh?
And I believe I can run a decent marathon.
Thank you very much.
Download Veely now.
I first became involved with the Castiles when I had my gas station. I met the manager, Gordon Vineyard, which everyone knows as Tex. And I was sitting in the back room playing the guitar, and he came in and said to me, you know, I could use your help. He said, I have a group of youngsters that I'm putting together that need somebody with a little experience to advise them and guide them. So that's how I first got involved with the Castiles. Well, they were a little rough around the edges, of course. When I met the band, they were a little rough around the edges. They were, Bruce was very ambitious. Every time I showed him something, he'd come back the next day and show me how he did it. And he did it quite well. Bruce was a very fast learner. The boys were very close, all of them. And they were all very close with Tex, the manager. So, of course, I grew in with them as time went by, and when it reached the point where I felt that I should be moving on because of our age difference, the boys wanted me to stay. So I did. I played with them for about a year.
A factory worker in his mid-30s, Tex was a kind-hearted benefactor whose support allowed the band to flourish.
He loved people, let's put it that way. He loved people. And people loved him. Tex was in his own pockets financially, constantly, putting out money for these boys that didn't have equipment to play with. And he just did whatever he could to help them wherever he could. I'm sure he never made any money on any of it. He did it out of the love of doing it.
The Castiles began to play local venues and discovered that Freehold was more than ready to embrace the rock and roll revolution.
It was a quaint town, Freehold. It's grown considerably since then. But I would say it was very receptive to the band. I think it was time for a change. And Bruce created the change that was needed in Freehold at that time.
When you're a little kid, you know, when you're 12, 13 years old, 14 years old, you know of every band that's starting up, and there was probably 15 different bands locally at the time, including some personal friends of mine that had bands. They used to play, there was a lot of local engagements there. Bruce and the Castiles, when they really got going, were one of the better bands. They're one of the top-notch bands. Everybody else was, it's hard to explain. Their music was good, but not good enough to really go anywhere. But Bruce's music, just by himself with his guitar, was good enough to go somewhere. And George Thies was absolutely fantastic. So when you listen to the Castiles and you heard them enough, they're very, very refined for a young group, considering a group that hadn't been together that long.
We expanded quickly, started playing the local swim clubs, and it kept moving on, and to a place in Red Bank, New Jersey, which is known as the Rendezvous Club, which I'm sure is long gone now. But that was a club aimed strictly at teenagers. It was a non-alcoholic type club, which teenagers came to dance. And we played there quite regularly.
In its formative days, the driving force behind the band was lead singer George Thies. But Springsteen slowly developed into the second frontman.
I think there sort of was a little battle going on as to who was going to do the lead singing and who was going to do the background singing there, but they worked it out between them. I stayed uninvolved in that part of it.
For seasoned hand Frank Marziotti, however, the time had come to leave the teenagers to their own devices.
A night in the Rendezvous Club playing, I had a little teeny bopper walk up to me and say, "Are you Bruce's daddy?" Well, that was about the time that I decided that I should stick to my other band and leave the Castiles to the Castiles, because they were such a young group, and they were a very progressive group, and they really didn't need me to stand in their way. That's the way I felt about it anyway. Maybe I was wrong.
As the band developed, Springsteen began to attract attention as a confident and accomplished young guitarist.
You would not hear anybody better than that, not at that age especially. Considering he was self-taught, you couldn't hear anybody any better than that.
I'll tell you the truth, it never occurred to me that Bruce was going to become the star and achieve the fame that he has today, but I knew he was a brilliant boy. He really and truly was. He was a very fast learner, and he had a lot of guts. He was very ambitious. He wanted to get where he is.
Upon their graduation from Freehold High in 1967, the band split, despite growing popularity and a series of performances at the famous Café Wah in New York's Greenwich Village. Springsteen's future now lay outside of his hometown. Asbury Park, New Jersey. Now a run-down, forgotten town. In 1968, however, when Bruce Springsteen began to gravitate towards it, this seaside beach resort was a hive of tourism and activity.
This is where you came. This is where you came with your friends. I know when I was a kid, my parents would say, "Listen, we're going to go to Ohio or something." I wanted to come here on my bicycle with my friends. Come to Asbury Park, come down, go on the rides, and look at the girls, and go shoot the pop guns, and it was really a thriving place, and a good place to come for walks along the boardwalk. You would always end up here. There's always something to do, different all the time.
Not only was the town popular for its beaches, boardwalk, and arcades, it housed a thriving rock and roll community and an abundance of live venues.
Asbury Park was a very lively community at that time. It's somewhat dead today, but it certainly was alive and thriving at that time.
Asbury Park was the mecca, and it was so close. 20 minutes out of Freehold, you could ride your bicycle down here. Rock and roll everywhere. Everything that Bruce was into was right here. Fantastic musicians everywhere you look. There's somebody that could do this, or some great piano players and stuff like that. All the clubs they have for young people to go to.
There was a lot of people. I mean, a lot of musicians, and everywhere you turned, there was somebody. If you needed a drummer or a bass player or something, there was always somebody around. You could say, "Hey, you want to try it?" And so we had a nice community of musicians in that area.
Rock and roll music was the thing in Asbury Park. Bruce was in the right place at the right time, and he knew it.
Although many bars offered gigs for cover bands, only one gave musicians the chance to experiment with their own compositions, the upstage. It was here that Bruce found his haven.
There was the beach bars, had the cover bands, top 40 was, you know, the big thing. Although the album rock bands were coming up, you know, Led Zeppelin was extremely popular then, and you know, anything that Clapton or Steve Winwood did was big. So that was coming up, and there was no room for that in the beach bars because they were an older crowd. They wanted to hear the hits, and they had some great players over there too. And those guys, after their shows, would come over and hang out with us at the upstage and jam with the freeform players and the more underground, we called it underground at the time, kind of music. Now they call it alternative or whatever. And, you know, we were more, you know, Bruce would get a bunch of guys and jam and do a song that lasted 25 minutes, you know, and just make it up, you know, just kind of like a blues progression or something. And so the music scene was, like I said, there was different levels.
While Bruce formed a short-lived three-piece called Earth, a young musician by the name of Vinny Lopez was also checking out the scene.
I was in a band called, with Danny Federici, Bill Chinnock, and Gary Talent was in the band for a little while, called the Downtown Tangiers Rock and Rhythm and Blues Band. And we toured with the Electric Circus and played in New York City in like 1967, 68. And when that band broke up, Federici and I were still looking for people to play with.
A chance meeting with local surfboard manufacturer Carl Tinker West would alter both Lopez and Springsteen's situation enormously.
I got involved with, because I liked music. I was originally from California in the 60s. A friend of mine named Gordon Kinnerly was involved with Quicksilver Messenger Service. And San Francisco was original music. Upon moving to the East Coast, because that was where the surfboard market was, believe it or not, at that time, I found that all the music that was around was cover music. There was nobody doing anything original at all. And that's why I did that. Then I found the upstage through a friend of mine named Jim Fainer, who was a biker type guy who was the bouncer there and everything else. And we used to go up there and listen to people jam. And that is where I met Mr. Lopez. I just told him, if you got a bunch of guys, get some guys together, you put a band together, I've got a couple thousand square feet up here, and you can rehearse up there. But the deal is, all original music, none of this copy stuff. See, because there's no way you're going to make money being a record player, an animated recording. And Vinny said, good idea, or whatever he said. I don't forget the exact words, but he agreed to it and started to go scout out fellow musicians of the same ilk.
I heard Bruce was going to be playing at this Italian-American club in Long Branch with Earth. And me and my buddy Chuck Dillon, we went up to the place, and there he was playing. And when he took a break, you know, I talked to him for a little bit and said, hey, come down the upstage, maybe we can jam down there, you know, because the upstage was still cooking. And months or so after that, Brucey shows up at the upstage.
And he says, you got to come down here and see this guy. What do you think of him? And it was Springsteen. And Springsteen, even then, as a young guy, was one of the best live performers I'd ever seen. Played guitar. He played guitar all right, but he could sing and knew how to communicate with an audience. He would put fire into it, and it worked.
A band was born, comprising Springsteen, Lopez, organist Danny Federici and bassist Vinnie Roslin. Originally called Child, the band changed their name to Steel Mill and began to compose and practice their own songs.
Once they started rehearsing and practicing and doing this stuff, it evolved. And as it evolved, I mean, you're sitting in the shop, you can hear this every day, and I thought this is getting better and better. It just got better and better. I mean, it evolved. It didn't start out with four guys getting there and just jamming and playing this stuff, because Bruce would write these songs on a daily basis. I mean, he's always sitting around an acoustic writing lyrics, trying to make things fit. And then when he finally got it the way he thought it would work, he'd get them all together in a pile, They'd make the music, and they'd play with it until they got it.
With an enhanced PA system created by Tinker, the band went on the road with the intention of rapidly gaining an audience. The plan was very quickly realised.
We played one gig once we had some songs together. We played a gig in Long Branch in this park, and a whole bunch of bands in it. And we were like not the last band to go on, but we were like the next to last band to go on. And we caused a scene. And then the next gig we did was at Monmouth College on the back stairs. And all the people, it was a lot of people, 300-400 people down at the bottom of the stairs in the back of Monmouth College. And when we started putting up our equipment, they all got up and came towards, they wanted to get right around where we were. And we got scared. We all ran inside Monmouth College, saying, what the hell's going on here? We thought they were going to attack us like we saw in them Beatle movies. We really did. We thought that. Then we came out and set up and played. And that's another whole story, that gig.
There was a feeling there that something was going on, and it felt right. There's no two ways about it. It felt right. And the sound, the music, I thought was excellent. I thought it was great, basic, rock and roll. It was not a lot of fancy effects, not a little BS. It was rock and roll, and that's what really works, and it still works today.
Tinker took a bunch of guys who were blue-collar kids, brawlers, rough people, factory workers, and put them on stage and made them sound good. He had a great sound system. He was from California, and he used to always say to me, we got to do like the Grateful Dead does. Put on a great show, get people dancing, make a good vibe, is what he always said. We got to have good vibes like the Grateful Dead. So he always pushed that, and have a large gathering and a big sound system, and just make it open for everybody to party, like a mini festival, that Woodstock kind of gathering on a smaller scale. And he always pushed that. So yeah, Tinker was great like that. He didn't like the little club things. He never wanted the steel mill band to play in any small dives or anything like that. It was the big stuff or nothing.
We just wanted to make music, and Tinker helped us make music, and because of Tinker we went to Richmond, and we went to Chapel Hill, we went to California, and Tennessee, Nashville, and colleges. We played in colleges, played at Monmouth College, had a good following around here. People, for some reason or another, once we all got together, coming from all these areas, people just started coming to see us. They flocked to see us. It was amazing.
The band's reputation was growing. Springsteen in particular was emerging as a natural and popular frontman. And as Steel Mill travelled, it became clear that he was destined for far more than just an East Coast reputation.
They were indigenous to this area, but Bruce had a special quality when he would perform that was one step above your normal guy. He would walk in a room, and for some reason you would just know he was in the room. He's one of those kind of people, and when he performed, he would become completely almost out of his own character, and the guy would dig deep, and he would come up with these songs that, at the time, I was in awe. I said, I want to be good enough to play with a band like that.
When I first met him at the Upstage, I wasn't thinking about superstardom or all that stuff. I just wanted to see what would happen when they put it together. But once we started playing live, this is from my schooling in the San Francisco, California thing. I always, like I said, I've said 5 times, I look at an audience. Because your personal opinion, I've learned this a long time ago, my personal opinion when it comes to music means nothing because everybody's different. But when you can get a bunch of them, it would become a feedback thing. It would feedback, and the more it fed back, the more he gets into it. And that's what a live performer is.
Everybody would talk about it afterwards, and we all agreed that if anybody from Asbury Park was going to make it, it was going to be Bruce, you know. He was pretty obvious the choice, you know. He had the right talent.
In 1970, Steel Mill supported high-profile acts, from rising British rock stars Black Sabbath to late 60s icons Ike and Tina Turner. Towards the end of the year, Springsteen surprised many by recruiting a new vocalist, Robin Thompson, from Virginia band Mercy Flight.
We did a show here in Richmond on the 7th floor, the very top floor of a parking deck. And we did this concert. It was Mercy Flight, Steel Mill, and another band from Northern Virginia, as I recall. I can't remember the name. But it was after that, if my memory serves me well, it was after that concert that Bruce just off the cuff mentioned, he said, hey, you know, I'm thinking about another singer in the band. Why don't you come up and try out for it? And it very much took me back. I mean, I couldn't figure out why he needed anybody else, you know. But I went up to Jersey and stayed up there for, I don't know, a week, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 days, and rehearsed with them. And then they all went into a room, you know, and left me outside, and I guess they huddled and decided that they wanted me in the band, and came out and said, okay, we think this will work. So I quit school and moved to New Jersey.
Now, I was a fan of him when he had Mercy Flight. When I saw their band, they had a great, I said it was the best band in Richmond. There was no band that was close to Mercy Flight. They were the best guys going down there. And when he went in with Bruce, it added something to the band, and everybody was happy. I had no pros or cons about that, because my feeling is if you manage a group of people, if they're happy, then the end product is always better. If people are, you know, they're at odds with each other, then nothing's going to work. And so the best thing to do is just do your thing. And they were all happy. Everybody liked the sound. I had nothing to say with it. I just felt it was fine. It suited me fine. It was another mic on stage, and they sang well together. Bruce and Robin sang very well together.
I think he wanted to play more guitar. And I also think that he just wanted another person to help with the backup singing. I mean, there was maybe a need for that also. So it wasn't like I was the lead singer front guy all the time, because I wasn't. You know, a lot of times I was playing tambourine, and I think they probably thought that they could teach me how to play some bass at one, you know, for a few songs, because Stephen was actually a guitar player and playing bass. And I'm sure he wanted to play guitar a little more, which would actually make the band sound a little bigger too, if there was a bass player with two lead guitar players in the band. And I think that maybe that was in the back of his mind too, that I could, you know, jump on the bass occasionally and play.
Thompson began touring with the band and was immediately aware of Springsteen's potential.
Great guitar player, you know, great charismatic person on stage, you know, had a way about him that, you know, something was going to happen with the band, or at least with him. And, you know, when you're when you're a player too, you kind of see that kind of stuff. You know, you notice that right off, that it's a natural thing for him to be doing what he's doing, and it came off exactly like that. You know, there was kind of a little love triangle, you know, between my girlfriend, and Bruce, and me, and so that was a strange thing, you know, and it got in the way a couple of times, you know. And that's about as far as I'll talk about it with that. But that the only thing that was strange about that whole thing was that there was a point in time when Bruce and I had the same girlfriend, you know, and it was kind of sit back and wait on, okay, is she going to end up marrying Bruce, or is she going to be my girlfriend, or what, you know? That's the only thing that was ever a strange
strange situation. Other than that, I mean, I had a great time, you know.
In December, Springsteen travelled to Los Angeles to visit his parents, who had moved there several years before. He celebrated Christmas here and thought long and hard about his future. The following year would herald many changes. When Bruce returned from California in 1971, he shocked friends and bandmates alike by informing them that Steel Mill was over. Having seen Van Morrison play, he had new influences, and these could not be developed within the confines of a hard rock band.
After Steel Mill broke up, Bruce already had a plan. In fact, the reason they broke up is because he had a plan. It wasn't haphazard at all. When he came back from California, from what I remember talking to him about it, was that he had seen Van Morrison's band in San Francisco and was very impressed. And that was when Van Morrison had the big band with the horns and the girl singers. And he thought, hey, I need to try something like this. And so he did. And that was the whole reason that the Steel Mill was broken up. He basically just told everybody, look, I'm done with this. I'm going to start something new. You know, if you want, you know, if you want to join along with me, you can, and if you don't have to.
Yeah, it was a musical change, yeah, to go from where we were in Steel Mill to go to this whole other R&B more thing. You know, because Steel Mill wasn't that. Steel Mill was heavy rock, jazz, what have you stuff, whatever was there. And that's the only reason he wanted to change. He wanted to do something different. You know, and you know, everybody talks about the Asbury sound. Well, there's the beginning of it. The change from Steel Mill to that band with the horns. Nobody did that before. You know, everybody had a sax player maybe, but nobody had a little horn section. You know, but there again is other influences. Van Morrison, you know, the horn sections, you know, here and that. You know, Bruce wanted to go maybe more in that direction.
And Vinny, of course, was going to stay. Vinny was always Bruce's main drummer. He was like his big brother. Vinny was like Bruce's, what would you say, his protector, his bodyguard, his big brother. He always watched out for Bruce, you know. Well, he didn't call it the Bruce Springsteen Band. In fact, he just called it the Big Band. They didn't know what to call it because, you know, Steel Mill had a connotation of being a loud, crunching metal guitar band. And this was going to be lighter, more of a soul band. And, you know, they tossed around some silly names. And finally, one day, I don't know where we were, Steve and I both said, look, Bruce, why don't you just give it your name? You know, it's your band. You're writing the tunes. You came up with the idea. It's your arrangements. And he says, well, you know, I don't know. That's kind of an ego trip, isn't it? And we said, no, man, you do it. Believe us, it'll work. And so that's why, for lack of a better name, he called it the Bruce Springsteen Band. But it was mostly through the encouragement of the people in the band.
Despite the participation of the majority of Steel Mill and its entourage in the Bruce Springsteen Band, some chose not to continue the journey.
I'm going to defend him. He was bored with what he was doing. He wasn't happy with it. And I think that everybody's influenced by people, whether they like it or not, or they want to admit it or not, is another thing. People are influenced by other people around them. Their peers tend to influence them. And at that time, Leon Russell, Joe Cocker, big deal. They were doing great. And it was an incredibly full, good thing. It was arranged well. It cooked. Okay? So when he did the 10-piece band, all that went through my mind was, if you have 10 people, how are we going to book this on the level we're on? Because if we get $2,000 a night, that's $200 gross per individual. You're not going to have any support group because you can't afford to. I can't afford to just pay the gas and the guys to help move all the stuff. How are you going to put them up in a hotel room with a 4-piece band? I could find people that would put us up. You know, we could go. We had no overhead, none. Okay. Well, when you're doing something in a gestation type stage, you have to do it with no money. The things we did with no money, sure, it was hard. It wasn't easy. But we didn't have any debts. Everything came in, everybody kept. But when the 10-piece band came, I didn't resign. I just looked at the economics of the whole thing and said, forget it.
Although Bruce was now without a manager, he continued to improvise with his Asbury Park colleagues. In May, the most bizarre collective emerged, Dr. Zoom and the Sonic Boom.
Well, Dr. Zoom, we had everybody we knew in the band. You know, 2 of everything. 2 drummers, 2 basses, 2 guitars, 2 singers, 2 this, baton twirlers, ringmaster, 2 Monopoly players. You know, Big Danny and Big Tiny played Monopoly.
We just put it all together and had some fun. You know, it was basically taking the feel of the upstage club and bringing it out into a concert setting, and on a large scale. And it was the jam, the idea of the big jam of friends doing a concert, and we had the best time. It was so much fun.
No matter how fruitful these bands may have been, Springsteen seemed to be treading water, and once again Tinker West became involved.
They bopped around here and they did this and that. They weren't doing anything. And I had a friend of mine named Pat Carwin. Pat knew these guys from the park that had something to do with the Partridge Family at the time, which was a big deal then. Jim Creticus, who was a hell of a nice guy, and Mike Appel. And he said that, I said, you know, Bruce is going nowhere. I said, he said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll set you up with these guys. Took Bruce up there and sat him down with just an acoustic guitar. And that same guitar, by the way, is still upstairs in my bedroom because I didn't have a good Martin D28. I did. So I loaned him the guitar and he played. And they immediately realized this guy can write songs because they were both songwriters.
By February 1972, Springsteen was signed into a long-term deal with Appel and Creticos's company, Laurel Canyon. They took him to John Hammond of CBS Records, who had famously signed Bob Dylan. He offered Bruce a 10-album deal. Both Appel and Creticos saw Springsteen as a solo performer, and with the stamped approval of Hammond, Springsteen was immediately promoted and marketed as a successor to Bob Dylan's crown. These comparisons would be both productive and restrictive.
While I was smart enough not to take the Dylan comparisons literally, that doesn't mean they had no effect on me whatsoever, and I knew what that was about. It was about people who weren't as good as Bob Dylan. You know, even though several of the others, Loudon Wainwright and John Prine, ended up being favorite artists of mine. It took them a while to get going. And the same's true with Springsteen.
Springsteen is Springsteen. I mean, you can't say that with these record companies, they always do this. Oh, he's the next this or the next that. Bullshit. He's him. And by the way, the history will bear that out. He is him. He's not Bob Dylan. I mean, I said he would be bigger than Bob Dylan. I told him that, but doesn't mean he's going to be Bob Dylan. He's got that ability to project himself and the ability to write great songs, and he's a tremendous live performer. What can you say?
It's not just CBS that was pushing the Bob Dylan comparisons. The Bob Dylan comparisons were a ready-made journalistic hook for anybody at a time when, you have to remember, Dylan himself was in considerable seclusion. He wasn't performing. His records were coming out irregularly. He was about to break with Columbia for a little while. And people were very concerned about his disappearance. So the search for a new one was a felt need. It wasn't just a commercial ploy.
Well, I think it was a really mixed legacy for Springsteen from what he has said and what others have said about it. It was a real double-edged sword because on the one hand, it got him a lot of attention that he otherwise wouldn't have gotten. And that the singer-songwriter sort of label allowed his songwriting and also Springsteen's sort of, very much autonomous, control-centered approach in the early part of his career really allowed that to flower. The downside of that was that it burdened him with a lot of expectations that he had trouble meeting, and it obscured his real musical roots.
Despite protests from CBS and Mike Appel, Springsteen refused to go solo with the album, and he called on friends Vinnie Lopez and Gary Talent to help him out.
No, they didn't want us, but Bruce insisted on having, because he knew I knew the songs, Gary knew the songs, we'd play the songs, so, went easier that way. When we got in the studio, it only took a week, Didn't take a long time to do that record. Once we started doing once Bruce called, because I wasn't in the band, there was no band once that Bruce Springsteen band broke up. I was working in a boatyard. And Bruce called me up and he says, listen, I'm signing with CBS, do you want to do an album? And I said, sure. So then we started rehearsing, and then when we were in the process of rehearsing for the album is when I met Mike and Jimmy Creticus. And right off the bat, I really didn't like him.
Overcoming personal and creative differences, Bruce and the band travelled to New York in June 1972 to record Springsteen's debut album. Released the following year, Greetings from Asbury Park was a technically flawed but intriguing introduction to the world of Bruce Springsteen, bringing him to the attention of many respected journalists.
I became aware of him with the release of the first album, Greetings from Asbury Park. It was a notable record that I thought was a little excessive, and I still do. It's a young record, but a record of somebody who clearly had a lot of talent.
I remember not being particularly impressed with Greetings from Asbury Park. I mean, it was, it's okay, but there were a lot of good albums around at that time. There was a real a glut. If you like singer-songwriters, it was a good time to be liking them. So I don't remember Greetings from Asbury Park standing out particularly. I don't remember people sort of saying, oh, I've seen the future of rock and roll, his name is Bruce Springsteen. It was sort of, have you heard Greetings from Asbury Park? Yeah, it's good, yeah. And so it was sort of there bubbling away, promising debut, could do better, I think, was about the sort of general perception.
Well, I think Springsteen himself has always had reservations about that record. I mean, he didn't like the way it was produced, for example, and I don't think it is a terribly well-produced record. I think it was an important landmark for him in that it established certain things that would be recurrent on subsequent records. I mean, certainly the sort of dense wordplay, the sort of playfulness, the sort of R&B sound on some of this stuff. These are all sort of durable legacies. But one of the things I think that makes Springsteen exciting for those of us who have followed his career is we all know artists who, in some sense, their best step is their first step. That they've distilled many years worth of material into that sort of debut record. For Springsteen, I think Greetings was a kind of a way station. It was not its primary value was in the way in which it sort of hinted at things to come or sketched at stuff that would find fuller fruition later.
Despite the delay of the album's release, Springsteen and the band went on the road, along with several of the Asbury Park regulars as roadies.
Yeah, well, we played, oh God, that first year we went out, we were on the road constantly. We were playing 14 nights here, and then having 2 days to drive to Chicago, and then playing 7 nights there, and then we'd drive to Springfield and play 3 or 4 nights there, and then back to Boston, and then down to D.C., and we were just constantly in the station wagon and the equipment truck. So we got a dose of what it was like to be out on the road and staying in hotels,
It was very different because in the old days with Tinker, Tinker was the ringleader. He was like, okay, follow me. It was like we loaded up Tinker's truck. We followed him. Sometimes I would ride with Tinker, whatever. It was always, Tinker was taking us around, and he took care of all the stuff, found us places to stay, he had the promoter, he had everything lined up. Mike Appel would send us out on these gigs, and we were on our own. We knew where to go, but we had to find it. We had to stop in gas stations and say, hey, do you know where this place is?
We were unnecessary. The only thing necessary was Bruce, so we became, to him, unnecessary. And I didn't like that very much. And Because the first night I remember he whisked Bruce away and told us he was God. Mike Appel. He goes, from now on, I'm God. I say, you do. You know, and we're all sitting on the steps of this gym going, you know, and on the way home I was thinking about it. I was crying. I was so upset about this now because we went from making, we always, steel mill all the way till this point. Whatever came in, expenses, here's yours, here's yours, here's yours, here's yours. After the expenses, if it was $5, $5, $5 at the end, that's what we got. But then Mike Appel took that away from us and says, you're not making anything now, the band.
It was tough on us because we had that family feeling with the band, and Mike didn't care about that. He didn't want to know nothing about that. He just wanted to know, you know, shut up and do your job. Go to the show and don't complain. And a lot of times, we had to, you know, pay our own way and then try to get reimbursed from him later. I mean, he sent us out on the road a lot of times with insufficient money to live on, or credit cards that would get taken while we were fueling up. You know, you can get gas at a gas station and the guy would take your credit card. You had to pay cash to leave. And so who had the cash? Me.
I called Bruce up that morning. When I got home, I called him up. I said, hey, you know, Mike, I mean, we were only making $35 cash. We weren't even making that. We were making, you know, less than that money. And then what happened was after I called Bruce, he goes, well, I didn't know Mike was going to do that. I said, yeah. And then the next week, they said, okay, you're going to make $35 cash each a week. Plus, they put us up in the hotels, you know, and feed us and blah, blah, blah. But $35 cash. Because I called Bruce up. I said, you know, because Mike just said we're going to make nothing. We can just go out on the road and they'll take care of us, but we're going to make nothing. I said, what if I want to come home? I can't even take my girl out to get a pizza pie. Go to the drive-in.
Yet the problems of the road were hidden from the journalists, who were instead discovering that Springsteen was far more distinctive than the numerous pretenders to Dylan's crown, and that he would perhaps survive these comparisons to become an artist in his own right.
Springsteen had that local identity. Once again, opposing him to Loudon Wainwright and John Prine, each of whom also did, but not in the same kind of specific, detailed way, and also not in the same kind of working class way, was an important reason for the excitement he generated. It was also useful that he wasn't from the South. It just made him different. There was no, I mean, as much as he loved rock and roll, there was no Southern folky, folk scene, that kind of man of the, Woody Guthrie style man of the people thing about him. He was another kind of man of the people that seemed, and I believe actually was, insofar as the term makes any difference, pretty authentic. In terms of a credible persona, a persona you could suspend your disbelief over, his New Jersey identification definitely gave him an angle and a leg up.
In April, while still touring, Springsteen went back to the studio. In the past year, he had recruited new band members David Sanctius on keyboards and Clarence Clemens on saxophone. Both Asbury Park veterans, they added to a stronger troupe, and the mistakes of the rushed greeting sessions were not repeated.
The first album we did in, like I said, a week, basically all one-take tracks. The second album now took more time. It did. Like Rosalita, we didn't know what we were doing with Rosalita until we got in the studio and played with it and worked with it here and there, and then came up with these, and then did it. You know, like Sandy. We didn't know we were going to do Sandy. We were fooling around in the studio with this lick, and unbeknownst to us, they were recording it. So when we went back after we were done rehearsing, they said, listen to this, and they played it back. And we said, oh, wow. And then we talked for a minute, got this and that and that and this, and then we went in and recorded Sandy. You know, because it sounded so great. So songs, it took a little while. Each song was a little more involved.
Springsteen decided that an even richer sound was required. In a repeat of his upstage days, he recruited old friends to participate. Richard Blackwell, Bruce's old Freehold cohort, and now an accomplished percussionist, was only too happy to help out.
Bruce is very particular about what he wants to do. You can't take that much time in the studio. As a musician, you have to kind of like do it, and then if it's appreciated, he ain't gonna say nothing. If it's not, he's gonna say, no, I want something different. So you as a musician have to come up with the right. So it's kind of tough, you know. I mean, I vaguely remember doing the Wild Innocent album, you know, like I told you, back in them days, man, that was Flip City, man, forget it. But I think Bruce just basically wanted to hear the sound of the drum. You know, he wanted to hear that in his music.
Bruce also employed the talents of Albie Talone. Although he had helped the band out as a roadie since the Steel Mill days, Albie was a respected folk musician and had not played with Springsteen since the Dr. Zoom concerts. Quite unexpectedly, he was asked to participate.
I became involved in the Wild Innocent E Street Shuffle album because I was there as a roadie, and Bruce knew that I had played saxophone with him before, and he had an idea for a song. He and David had written a song called the E Street Shuffle in David's living room on E Street in Belmar, New Jersey. That's where the name comes from. Bruce got a hold of me and said, come on over to rehearsal. I rented a baritone sax for you to play. I said, wow, you're kidding. That's what I played in high school in the marching band. He goes, yeah, I know you can play these parts. We need Clarence to play the regular tenor part. We need this low baritone sax. And at the time, he said somebody had invented a new baritone sax with an extra low note, and that's the one that we hit.
Like Albie was one of the original musicians that played at the Upstage. We all met him there, and then Southside and Miami Steve and Albie lived at Albie's father's house for a long time, and we always go over there and play Monopoly. And then when we actually started doing the band stuff, we needed roadies, so Albie became one of our roadies, and he was good at it. And then when we started recording stuff, I played a clarinet on a couple of things. Albie, he wasn't a great sax player, but he was there. So we just put him on the album. Why not? Why not? And he did his thing.
In November, The Wild, The Innocent and the E Street Shuffle was released. Critical reaction was better, and this time there was no discussion of Springsteen as a solo artist in the mould of Bob Dylan. This was rock and roll, albeit Asbury Park style.
Well, it's a great album. And, there's stuff there that's priceless. Like the yelling in the back of the E Street Shuffle. We have a party going on. We were really drinking and hooping and hollering. We weren't just standing there acting like we were doing. We had tequila. So it was fun. It's fun doing it.
Well, I think that Springsteen was very anxious after that first record came out to establish his rock and roll bona fides. And I think also because he was not entirely happy with the way that Greetings turned out, that he was all the more determined to get something closer to that Asbury Park scene. And so I think that's what you see in that record. And I think in many ways that's a more successful record. I mean, there's more sort of musical excitement. It's probably Springsteen's least disciplined record. I mean, you get these symphonic suites that sort of go on and on. But in terms of raw vitality, I think it's sort of hard to match. I mean, that opening track, Rosalita, many of the songs on theirs, Sandy, of course. These by contrast really do prove to be enduring songs from the Springsteen canon.
Listening to The Wild, the Innocent today, E Street Shuffle still sounded absolutely wonderful. I don't know that the rest of the music, qua music, sounded as wonderful as that track. But certainly, yeah, he was saying, as Dylan had said, what was it, 7 or 8 years before, no, actually, this acoustic guitar writing long songs about my life thing is just a distraction. I'm really a rock and roller.
At the start of 1974, Springsteen and the band played several gigs at Asbury Park haunt the Stone Pony. Despite a good reception, internal problems between Vinnie Lopez and Mike Appel were at boiling point.
I was there, I started the band. And now I'm getting, like, crap from this guy, Mike. I didn't like it. I spoke up. Make a long story short, you know, and I wouldn't be the guy, I'm not, like I said, I'm not a sheep. I just didn't follow along. I asked the questions. Why did Clarence have to get arrested? Because you were supposed to be paying his alimony payments, and you didn't for 3 months. So the cops come and arrest Clarence. Night before we're supposed to go on tour with Chicago. Oh, we need the money. Oh, no, I'm not giving any money. So I had to go up to New York and battle with Mike Appel to get Clarence out of jail. Okay. Little stuff like that. But it added up. Because there was always little stuff like that. Like I said, the royalty story before. Oh, who do you think you are? You're not getting royalties. Oh, yeah, well, I didn't like that either. And then when I pushed his brother down on the ground, that was the last straw for him.
The loss of Lopez was a heavy blow to the band, yet touring continued. In May, Springsteen's disappointing commercial success was given a boost by John Landau, a Rolling Stone critic who pronounced Springsteen the future of rock and roll, after being blown away by his live performances. Record sales and critical interest exponentially increased.
I think that Landau was a very prominent and well-respected critic. He was also already a record producer. Certainly, that extreme statement had a lot of clout with all of us. It forced us to think about it. And the fact of the matter was that the goods were there. So, he was right. Now, if he'd said that about Livingston Taylor, who he also produced, well, Livingston Taylor was terrible. And he never convinced anybody that Livingston Taylor was really worth much. He liked him.
Not only did Landau's emphatic celebration of Springsteen sell more records, it also attracted more people to his live shows, where many were immediately won over by the dynamic performance. As with Steel Mill, Springsteen's live show was a defining factor in his growing success.
You see Bruce live, and you listen to Bruce on an album, and I'm pretty sure you'll agree with this, it's a world of difference.
Springsteen's reputation before Born to Run was based on his live show, which by 1974, when I saw it twice in the space of a couple of weeks, it was pretty magical. You know, by then he had his shtick down. He was a great storyteller. He understood something, in fact, quite a bit about how to move on a stage. About 6 months later, my wife reviewed him at the Westbury Music Fair, which is a very middle-class venue out in Long Island, which has a revolving stage. And he got up, was it on the piano? Where was it? He figured out a way to stay in one place on the stage and made a big joke of it. He says, and everybody who he's in front of cheered, and everybody who only saw his back booed. But, I mean, the man really had a sense of how to use the stage. It was a wonderful... I went to a lot of shows at Westbury because I reviewed out there. I never seen anybody else do that. What a smart guy. What a funny guy. He always had that.
There are lots of performers who have a close relationship with their audience. I mean, the Grateful Dead comes to mind. I mean, Fish comes to mind. But there is something, you know, notably, even uniquely communitarian about Springsteen's relationship with his audience. I mean, this is something that has been a part of his, you know, again, persona, a term I use to suggest both myth and reality. I mean, you know, the sort of the sound checks where he goes to the back of the room, you know, before the show, making sure that everyone can hear well. You know, the way that he keeps the block of tickets and up front, you know, until the very last minute. The way in which the sort of the mythic inviting the girl on the stage with him. These are all sort of gestures. You can't necessarily read too much into that. It's all for show, literally. And yet the habit doing this kind of thing over a long period of time suggests more than just a kind of packaging on his part, but really, especially when you combine it with the topics of his songs and the generosity of his shows, the stories of them going on and so on. It's really part of a larger picture of a democratic rock star, an almost contradiction in terms that Springsteen manages to sort of square, and make legitimate in some sense.
Halfway through the production of his next album, Born to Run, Springsteen invited producer-cum-journalist Jon Landau to listen to the results. To Mike Appel's disapproval, Landau took over production of the album, and a lasting partnership was formed.
I think Landau was a sounding board. I think he was an intellectual, but I think he was an intellectual with roots in rock and roll. And I think he really literally opened Springsteen's mind to all manner of things, musically, politically, sociologically, all sorts of things. And of course he's been there for, over 30 years as, producer, manager, and, sort of a very loyal friend. So I think he has played a very important role. And I think at the beginning, he was absolutely crucial in shaping, maybe not so much the sound, but just almost giving Springsteen an identity.
The album that resulted from this fruitful union, Born to Run, was to bring Springsteen international acclaim. With its superior productions and anthemic tracks, the record became a benchmark of 1970s rock music.
Born to Run is a much better record than the first two albums. And I believe it's a better album than the two that followed it as well.
The thing about Springsteen and Born to Run was it just arrived and it was just like wham, and it was just in your face, and you thought, here's a guy who's listened to Phil Spector, who's listened to Roy Orbison, who's listened to Bob Dylan. He's soaked all that up, he's putting that in this record, and you could hear that in Born to Run. People now, perhaps it's a bit sort of dated and, sexist and chauvinistic, and the whole album's a bit sort of creaky. But at the time, it just had this real impact. It came shooting out, and you just thought, this is really good. The production, the lyrics, the singing, there was real intensity to it, and that was missing from music. There wasn't that passion. Springsteen really rekindled the passion in rock and roll in the mid-70s. And, I think it's to his eternal credit. It wasn't fashionable, but he just wanted to get some of that excitement back that he had as a kid, and it really wasn't anywhere else. And I'm not saying single-handedly, but he just came back and he really gave it a kick up the bum, and I think to his eternal credit, he just got it moving again. And I think Born to Run was the album that did it.
Not only did Born to Run display an evolution in Springsteen's music, the lyrics escaped the autobiographical New Jersey setting by which they had previously been identified and trod new creative ground.
I think on Springsteen's early records, I don't think there's much question that there are some really very obvious autobiographical elements. Something like A Song Like Spirit in the Night, can't but have, real people sort of attached to it. I think that as you get, into Born to Run and Darkness on the Edge of Town, Springsteen is very consciously, realizing that it's a big world out there, and that he wants to sort of, portray a wider canvas. You even see it in the settings of some of these songs. These are far away from anything he's ever experienced. And I think that's part of the story here.
In particular, Springsteen, like many American lyricists before him, became drawn to the metaphor of the road.
Well, this is an old trope in American culture. It goes back at least as far as, Walt Whitman, who talked about sort of Song of the Open Road, and Mark Twain, was a restless soul and covered the West and the South and whatnot. And so this is a venerable tradition even before Woody Guthrie gets to it. And then, of course, Dylan picks up where Guthrie left off. I think what's interesting about Springsteen in this regard is that Springsteen's embrace of the road had a more of an embrace of America at large. I think people like Dylan somehow held it at arm's length. There was a kind of skepticism somehow about mainstream American culture that impelled these people on the road. Springsteen, wanted to sort of blaze his own path, literally and figuratively, but I don't think he felt the same degree of alienation from America. And for him, the road was a sort of an encounter of discovery about learning what else he was a part of, more than it was getting away. That I think it is for the Beats, for example. There's a kind of sense of inclusion, of belonging to Springsteen's love of the road that I think makes him a little bit different than some of these other folks we could talk about.
Born to Run was the album that CBS and his fans had been waiting for. In October, Springsteen made the covers of both Time and Newsweek, and he was roundly recognised as a distinctive performer with an original and genuine artistic persona. By the end of the year, he had toured Europe and Canada. Yet a rapidly growing fan base and mainstream recognition was soon to be tainted by internal conflicts. (1976) was a bleak year for both Springsteen and his fans. In February, for the first time since signing with Appel and Kratikos, Springsteen asked to see his accounts. He was shocked by what he discovered therein, and in July he sued Mike Appel for mismanagement.
When Bruce signed up with them guys, I sat down to him and I said, Bruce, you have the perfect right to have your own accountant and to audit where that money goes. It would be worth your while, I'm only suggesting, to get an accountant, to everything they spend, the duplicates go to you, and audit the books. Keep an eye on your money. Obviously, Bruce was into playing his music. He didn't give a damn about that.
The lawsuit dragged on throughout the year. In 1977, settlements were made, and Springsteen began working on his next album. Yet, as that record showed, the year-long legal battles had left their mark on the artist.
There's something almost hard to believe, actually all too easy to believe, something almost out of a bad movie to think of, go back earlier, that Springsteen would sign a contract on the hood of a car in a dark parking lot, in the early 1970s. I mean, that sort of credulousness that he had, that he brought to the relationship with Appel. It just goes to show, how much of Springsteen's investment in his work led him to sort of foreclose or even, shut off other sides of things. I think this was an important event for him, mostly indirectly. We were talking earlier about the role of autobiography. I don't think the closest Springsteen ever came to sort of talking about this in his work was a song called "The Promise," which he didn't release for a very long time. I don't even know if it's been released at all. And I think that he backed away from that because it seemed too autobiographical, and I think actually he probably had the good sense to recognize that there were people in the world who had much more serious problems than struggling with his manager over the terms of a contract. Although I think that this was a real scare for him, but I think that this experience informed Darkness on the Edge of Town in particular, and sort of made him experience in a visceral way that things might not really turn out the way you want them to. I mean, he had seen people like his father where things hadn't turned out well. Suddenly he was confronted with the possibility that this could really happen to him. And I think that really was very, very important in terms of shaping what happened from there on out.
When the new album finally appeared in 1978, it became obvious that Springsteen had changed. Darkness on the Edge of Town, as its title suggests, was a far more somber outing than Born to Run.
Well, I think that Born to Run is a record about anxiety, and Darkness on the Edge of Town, I think, is a record about anger.
It was a darker album. It's a lot more somber. He was pushing 30. It was a lot more reflective. It was a lot more introspective, and yet it had this incredible sort of. He somehow managed to combine that sort of introspection and reflection with that very sort of big rock and roll sound. I mean, there are a lot of real concert favourites that stayed in his set for years, like Promised Land, Badlands, Dance on the Edge of Town, Racing in the Streets. I mean, they all came from that one album, and they all managed to sound, live. They sounded fantastic.
It was more fun than Born to Run. Born to Run was really hard. Darkness was it took a long time, but it was not we recorded a lot of songs, recorded about 30 songs. And what would happen is I'd write a song, and then I'd write like 4 songs. And they would be a progression up. And the 5th song, well, that would be like song number 2 on the album. And then I'd like write 4 more. And like the 9th song, then I'd be at a place where that was like the 3rd song on the album. And meanwhile, all these other songs, they'd be like transitional material, you know, to help you get to a particular place, you know. And so that's sort of the way the record was done. The actual recording of the songs did not take that long. Like on the record, Darkness on the Edge of Town, that's like all live in the studio, you know. That's vocals and band, everybody's playing live. Streets of Fire is mostly live. Something in the Night, that was a song that we did very first night in the studio. We did it as a demo tape, and that's all live. So like there's like 3 or so things that are like actually mostly live. It did not take no more than 1 or 2 days to record, you know, some one day, you know.
Darkness is a record, I think, where you confront the fact that things may not turn out the way you want them to, and coming to terms with that. Springsteen doesn't sort of turn this into an indictment of America. You know, this is not really a God Save the Queen moment. It's more a sense that you know, life is big and difficult and throws stuff at you that you can't necessarily handle, and things are not necessarily going to turn out the way you want them to, and it's not even clear why. And you have to sort of come to terms with that. That's why you have a song like, you know, Adam Raised a Cain, where you sort of come to terms with your patrimony, you know, or you come to terms with things like evil, you know, on a song like Prove It All Night. So, you know, in some ways, Darkness on the Edge of Town is really the crossroads of Springsteen's career, where he realizes that, you know, happy endings are not something you can take for granted in art or life.
Some, however, were not convinced by Springsteen's newfound introspection and melancholy.
Albert Murray said a great thing about the blues. He says the blues is not a way of, it's not the way black people express their pain. It's a way they transcend their pain. On Darkness at the Edge of Town, I don't think there's quite enough of the transcendence. That's the way I feel about it.
The album, nevertheless, proved to be a commercial success, and by the end of the year, Springsteen's professional difficulties were seemingly at an end when John Landau officially signed up as the singer's manager. In 1979, Springsteen returned to the studio, but with greater artistic control came a new perfectionism, and Springsteen would be working on this opus for over a year.
I think it's interesting. I mean, somebody once said that he is the Stanley Kubrick of rock and roll. I mean, there's this painstaking perfection. And when I interviewed him, at the end of the interview, we were talking, I said, any regrets? And he said, yeah. He said, the one thing, I wish I put out more records. He really, I think he knew that this perfectionism was actually really, you know, he was taking too long making records. I think in mitigation, I mean, you know, yes, it was a couple of years between Darkness and The River, but I mean, the guy was working his bollocks off. I mean, he was, you know, you look at the itineraries for the tours between Darkness on the Edge of Town and The River, and he working really hard. And this wasn't sort of, you know, a sort of 35-minute greatest hit show, you know, hi, great to be back in Pasadena, come back, 50-minute encore and gone. I mean, this was like, you know, 3-4 hour shows. And I mean, you know, you see footage of him from that time. I mean, he was losing 5-10 pounds a night on stage, just sweating. You know, he was working really, really hard. So I think, in fairness, you know, he could take his time making records.
It was October 1980 when the new record was finally unveiled to an eager audience. The River, a multifaceted double album, again displayed a maturing songwriter, willing to take his time compiling material, many tracks having already been road-tested on audiences since 1979.
He's using the road as a laboratory for many of the songs that end up on The River. And I think that one of the things that's going on is that he's trying to integrate different parts of himself, not only in terms of, you know, trying out the music live that's going to end up on the record, but also ending up with a record that has a kind of an emotional texture and a kind of variegated quality that really hasn't been the case in a lot of earlier Springsteen records. I mean, I've said that, you know, that Born to Run is about anxiety and Darkness on the Edge of Town is about anger, but The River really has everything. I mean, it's got the sort of the free-spirited stuff, you know, Sherry Darling, that harkens back to the early work. It's got the sort of more meditative songs like Wreck on the Highway or The Price You Pay. It's got, you know, rockers like Ramrod. It's got sort of tragedies like The River. And this sort of kaleidoscopic quality of the record is really the thing that sort of sets it apart. It happens to be my favorite Springsteen record because it's the most full vision, I think, of American life that you see on any of his records. It's my Desert Island Disc. It's sort of the synecdoche of Springsteen's career.
I think it was a direct response to the darkness on the edge of town. And I think the people who'd seen him in concert wanted that element of just sort of good time rock and roll, which the really uplifting stuff from The River captured. So I think it was Springsteen's attempt to try and make the audience happy by giving them, you know, something for everyone.
With the release of the album, Springsteen and the band embarked on an epic tour, characterised by extremely long performances that often incorporated more than 30 songs. In 1981, Springsteen returned to Europe to an ecstatic response. He would find that his distinct American outlook and persona was as embraced in this continent as it was in his own.
Well, I think that, of course, outsiders can perceive your contours better than you yourself can, and I think that's especially true in Springsteen's case. And I think that, you know, England in particular, which has such a long tradition of absorbing American music and appreciating American music perhaps better than Americans themselves can, you know, we're able to sort of see Springsteen's contours in a way that maybe a lot of American audiences couldn't. I think that then and now that Bruce Springsteen is the kind of American that non-Americans like. He represents the more attractive aspects of the American character, the sort of the openness, the relative lack of irony, the sort of a belief in the basic decency of the world. I think these are things that outsiders tend to like about Americans. They sometimes think of it as a kind of innocence, which perhaps it is. But there's something very appealing about that. And Springsteen, I think, much more so than just about any other American rock performer, very clearly embraced this vision of America with alacrity and with an unself-consciousness that was all the more appealing. There was nothing artificial about it. It really was, you know, expressed a kind of essential part of his persona.
In contrast to the lengthy recording of The River, Springsteen's next album was inadvertently recorded at his home in New Jersey. Released in June 1982, Nebraska was Springsteen's first overtly political record, a set of spare acoustic demos initially planned as a template for a full-band record. It was decided that it would remain more successful as a solo work, and 10 years on, it realised John Hammond and Mike Appel's initial plans of Springsteen as a singer-songwriter in the mode of Bob Dylan.
One of the things I admire tremendously about Springsteen is that Springsteen has real, somewhat inchoate, political ideals, and that he tries to live by them, that he puts his money and his time and his art where his mouth is again and again and again. I think his integrity is a truly remarkable thing to behold. And that begins with Nebraska. That's where he really is making a statement. Look, I mean, you want me to do more rock and roll? You want me to do that show on record again? No. This other thing is bothering me, and I want you to pay attention to it.
You'd had this big hit album, very successful tour, hit single. One would assume the next record would be The River Part 2. But Nebraska was a real sort of, whoa, you know, what's going on here? It's stark, it's acoustic, it's somebody who's been listening to Woody Guthrie, to Robert Johnson, to Hank Williams. Very different record than Springsteen had ever made before. It was a real, I think, direct response to the political climate in America, the way that a large part of the nation was disenfranchised by a right-wing government under Reagan. Republicans were very much in the ascendancy. And I think Springsteen almost was like the sort of the little guy fighting back. And, you know, it's interesting. I reviewed it at the time and I said, you know, this is the album that John Hammond always imagined Springsteen would make.
Nebraska was meant to be a rock and roll record, and he tried to make it a rock and roll record, and then he realized, you know what, this is really what I want, and what I want are the stories of these people, and this stuff stripped to its essence. I mean, it's really his sort of Woody Guthrie moment in that regard, and I think that, you know, sometimes we need to sort of make mistakes, you know, to find out who we really are, what we really want to say. And I think that's what happened in a case like Nebraska. And I think that Springsteen sort of learned a valuable lesson in Nebraska, and it's really been an important sort of mode that he's worked in ever since. He did it again with The Ghost of Tom Joad. He did it again with Devils and Dust. And you can even see it in some of his records, like Tunnel of Love, which, you know, are closer to that vision than they are that of Greetings from Asbury Park or Born to Run, or certainly from the Wild, the Innocent, E Street Shuffle.
It was Springsteen's next album, however, that would place him firmly in the annals of rock history. 2 years in the making, Born in the USA brought the artist to a massive global audience.
Well, Born in the USA is one of those really old albums that takes somebody from being a sort of cult figure, I mean, albeit, you know, a big cult like Springsteen, and just puts them into a whole other dimension. And quite often the album that does it isn't by any means the artist's best album. I mean, you know, Bridge Over Troubled Water is nowhere near the best album Simon & Garfunkel did. Dark Side of the Moon isn't the best Pink Floyd album. I don't think Born in the USA is, by any stretch of the imagination, Springsteen's best album. But there's something about a record that just jumps outside that audience and reaches into a whole new audience. Quite what happened with Born in the USA, I wish I knew, but he wishes he knew occasionally. It just seemed there seemed to be a zeitgeist about it. It seemed to tap into the mood of America.
What makes Born in the USA absolutely pivotal and the landmark in Springsteen's career is that it arrived at a time when Americans really felt like they needed, or some Americans felt like they needed, a kind of alternative vision or an original vision of American life that was different than that was being peddled by Ronald Reagan. Born in the USA, I think, you know, really again was a version of America that a lot of Americans were embraced with a great deal of alacrity. And moreover, again, I think that a lot of people around the world, you know, it was a version of America that they found very appealing at a time when there were real serious questions about American foreign policy, about the direction the country was taking, you know, about the sort of Thatcher, you know, Reagan sort of axis, and so on. And I think that was a durable moment in Springsteen's career in terms of it having long echoes. And I think we see it being echoed most recently just in the last presidential American election, where Springsteen played a similar oppositional role, and an oppositional role I think that made sense to many people to a great degree because that tradition had been established earlier on with Born in the USA. They really saw that as part of a living tradition that Springsteen sort of represented.
The song Born in the USA became problematic. A hit single, it was used and misused by politicians and pressure groups, and understood and misunderstood in equal measure.
He conceived a way in which he could protest and appeal to patriots at the same time. People who don't like him or don't think this sort of thing is worth doing in pop music, or think that just by being a mass culture hero you're automatically compromised, say, well, for that reason, it's a failure. The song has been misinterpreted, misused by many, many people, including politicians. But that was how it was designed. Its meaning is clear, and you have to trust the intelligence of his fans, the intelligence of the voter, if you want to go there, to make that distinction. I mean, what I believe is that it's going to be misused by people he couldn't possibly affect on that level anyway. They might like his music, but they're not going to like his ideology. And where it is very effective is taking people in the middle, I would suspect, who could go either way and who are induced to rethink and reconceive the issues that that song is very, very clearly about.
I think it gets back to sort of Springsteen's faith in American life. I mean, many British performers, even many American performers, have a kind of anti-institutional stance, a skepticism about authority that animates their work in a very positive way. Springsteen doesn't have that instinctive hostility toward established institutions. I mean, he certainly, you know, the experience of the Vietnam War, you know, raised questions for him like it did a lot of people of his generation. But I think that Springsteen probably has more faith in the idea of a good, legitimate leadership than, say, you know, the Clash or the Sex Pistols or, for that matter, Radiohead might. Springsteen has a willingness to believe in America.
But beyond the misunderstandings, Springsteen was now an undisputed rock icon. And once again, he went on the road. Playing stadiums across the globe, new audiences flocked to see Springsteen and the E Street Band in action. By 1985, Bruce was one of the biggest rock stars in the world. His fame and sales matched only by Prince and Michael Jackson. Springsteen would continue his journey across the following decades. Yet by 1985, the long and sometimes difficult road to establishing himself as a bona fide voice of America was complete. With awards pouring in for Born in the USA, sold-out gigs across the world and a massive upsurge in the sale of his albums, there was little doubt that Springsteen was now the boss.
I believe that Springsteen has a very, very distinct artistic personality. It's about a small-time America of people who have ordinary jobs. He says very clearly that this is a world of humane values, of democracy, where people care about each other, and he tries to embody that ideal of caringness. He's not macho in the usual way, which isn't to say he isn't very male. He creates an image of a decent ordinariness that has a heroism about it and a humor.
We had this crazy little fish bowl, and everybody wanted to be a big fish. So the idea was to get out of the fish pool, get into the ocean, and swim with the big fish and see how bad you are then. That's what happened. And it turned out that he was bad.
When you're off by yourself and you don't have all that extra influence, you have to rely on your own instincts. And Springsteen's instincts, basically, songwriting, can't beat him. Can't beat him. Writes great stuff.
You know, one of the initial things, I want to have fun. You know, I just started out doing it for fun. And that's a big reason why I still do it. I'm lucky that I can make a living at it now, you know. And the day it stops being fun probably be the day I stop doing it, you know.
It's a person, I really do think he's an admirable, decent person. For a person with that much power, he's lived a good life.